Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. I'm Latifa Farah, Associate Creative Producer at Venture for Canada and the producer of a new wave of entrepreneurship. The focus of this podcast is to hear from changemakers and Canadian entrepreneurs to learn about how they've developed their entrepreneur mindset and skills. We'll be chatting with CEOs, founders, and successful business leaders about their career journeys. We're excited to dive into these conversations about how to foster your entrepreneurial mindset and drive.
Annette Verschuren is Chair and CEO of NRStor Incorporated, an energy storage development company. Formerly, she was President of the Home Depot Canada and Asia, overseeing the growth of the company's Canadian operations from 19 to 179 stores. She also led the Home Depot's entry into China. Immediately prior to joining the Home Depot, Annette was president and co-owner of Michael's Canada, a chain of arts and craft stores where she opened 17 stores in 26 months. Annette, super excited to chat with you today. Welcome to the program.
Delighted to be here, Scott.
It has been such a pleasure getting to know you over the last 7 years, and you've been a true role model and inspiration, I think, for many Atlantic Canadians. And as a fellow Nova Scotian, I definitely look up to you a ton, and it's been remarkable what you've created in your career. And in advance of this interview, I reread your book, Bet on Me, which is a fantastic kind of memoir / kind of business book. And in it, you talk a lot about your childhood. So how did growing up on a rural dairy farm in Cape Breton influence your entrepreneurial career?
You know, in so many ways, right? Hard work. You have to work hard on a farm. And that is such an advantage that I have. I am not afraid of big problems and hard work. And I'm a bit of a work maniac, but I love it. To me, work is like a puzzle. And living on a farm and getting up to milk those cows in the morning and shoveling that manure incented me to want a different life. and of course, back in those days, the daughter was never, going to be the runner or the operator of the farm. That's changed a lot since then. But so I learned how to work hard. I had a lot of responsibility at a very young age. Kids that work on a farm, are the extension of their parents, right? And so we planted, we picked rocks, we, hauled in hay, we did all of that stuff. And so big responsibility at a very young age. I figured I could do anything at the age of 8 years old.
In your memoir, you talk about some challenges that you and your family experienced. Notably, your father experienced a massive heart attack when you were a teenager. And when you were also a teenager, you almost died from serious kidney complications.
Yes.
How did these really significant life challenges at a quite early age impact your personal resilience?
Look, those are the two biggest things that impacted my life, right? I was only 11 years old when my father had his first heart attack, and then he lived with us for another 18 years, but he died when he was 60, so he was young. But look, the children all had to really pitch in, my mom, and we really had to work hard. And so I was milking cows before school. I milked cows after school, and it really gave me a lot of responsibility. My brothers and sister too, a lot of responsibility at a very young age. And so that experience is something a child doesn't get very often. I learned, I was driving tractors when I was about 9, and but really had to drive a tractor seriously when I was 11 after my father got sick. So that was a big change in our lives. And my father, I remember going to the hospital with my brother, and we said to him, "Pop, you know what? We can run the farm," because the doctors were saying, "Look, maybe you have to give up the farm." He had pleurisy during the war, right? And so he did have challenges, although he was a very strong man, but he worked himself to death, right? He was only 42 when he had that heart attack, and he had 5 kids, the youngest 2, the oldest 12. And so, but we all pitched in, and we became the board of directors at the kitchen table, right? And we made decisions together, and we decided things, and I had all kinds of ideas, and my father loved particularly. I was a little wild sometimes, not wild, but I looked at things differently. And so he and my mom, they really encouraged me, and so we did things that were, I remember saying to him one day, why can't we just change we had these accidents on the trucks, the milk trucks, got close calls, and we had an accident, with the kids. My uncle was driving a car, and the car was flipped over and train. Luckily, we landed on the other side on a snowbank, but we lost control. It was really dangerous, but it was a dangerous spot for the CN anyway. And so, I said, why don't we just change the railway? But it got my father to think about, let's talk to the CN and let's see what we can do. And so installed in that off the house, they redirected the driveway, and it's maintained by the town to this day. Where my brother still lives on the farm. And so these are just, I saw ideas and I saw things implemented. My dad was a risk taker. God, he came to this country from the Netherlands with nothing, and he and mom. And so they showed us that a lot can happen, and they had great love for this country and the island that I grew up in. And so really, really learned a lot.
It's remarkable, your level of optimism. And I think that is, as you mentioned in your book, one of your defining qualities, because to go through those traumas as a child, that almost getting killed in a train accident with a car, which you alluded to, your father, your kidney issues, like that's a lot to go through while still being, a child or kind of adolescent. And I think that model that you mentioned, which is around, reflecting when you've gone through a near-death experience or the face, death in the face, it gives you I think a different appreciation for life. So I guess if you were to, right now, there's lots of young people that struggle with, anxiety or depression or kind of, and you're a board of Center for Addiction and Mental Health and do a lot on mental health issues. And you talk in your book about the challenges your sister and one of your closest friends, Dorothy's, gone through. What advice do you have for young people who might be, facing challenges on how to kind of emerge through those difficult times?
Look, I think, and I went through challenges too. I really did. And I sort of got ahead of it because I was smart enough to know that I needed help, and I sought help, right? And I have over the years, I've had this relationship with this wonderful psychologist, and because you need, look, stress and the pressure of today's world and the challenges associated with being an entrepreneur, not easy. Probably some of the toughest jobs in the world, quite frankly. A lot of how do you get to payroll? How do you get refinance? How do you get that product out to market? How do you get that service right? It's hard, really hard. And when you're young and don't have a lot of experience, it's particularly hard. And look, I think what's really encouraging, and I have been involved with mental health for many, many years, and it's dealing with it. It's accepting that there are challenges and seeking help. And there's more help. It's not as good. Look, it's a lot easier, having cancer than having mental health issues. Okay. Cancer can be dealt with. 95% of cancers can be dealt with. Some can't be, but there is a problem and there's a solution, or a number of solutions. Mental health is more challenging. It is the organ of the body that is least studied. It's changing, thank God, by the research of institutions like CAMH. Across the country, we are getting access to, young people are getting access to, but go for help. Don't be embarrassed by it. I mean, quite frankly, 1 in 5 families, 1 in 5 people in the country have this issue, and so I think it's really important to seek help, seek guidance. And it's amazing, you can overcome this if you get it early. If you can come back from Great Depression, you can come back from everything, but get ahead of it.
That's fantastic advice. And I want to say, I think, say on behalf of many Canadians, appreciative of your leadership on these issues. And I think it's so important to have leaders like yourself talking about the importance of mental health. And unfortunately, something like 50% of all Canadians who face significant mental health issues never seek professional support.
Never. No,
And
that's right, Scott. Yeah.
And if there were 50% of people with physical ailments who were not seeking support, it would be considered a crisis.
Crisis. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, but, you know, we're trying to uncover this issue. We're trying to make it so that is a normal conversation to have with people. It's getting better. Not there yet, Scott, but it's getting better.
Yeah, it's a huge, and I'll say, speaking kind of personally on the importance of kind of getting help is, in March of this year, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And there's a lot of things, compulsive things I've been doing since I was like 13 and 14 that I thought was just normal. I was like, oh, this is just normal things. And then, you know, it started to say, and then they're like, no, actually, this is not. And it was, you know, the amount of issues that have been causing me. Yeah. And if there's, and now at the same time, it's important to have self-compassion and recognizing, you know, that it's an illness and sometimes it's hard to understand. Yeah. But I wish, if there was one thing, is I wish I had sought treatment and had gone through exposure and ritual prevention therapy like 10 years ago versus, you know, kind of earlier this year. And it's, you know, ups and downs. It's about managing kind of chronic things, just like people deal with depression or significant anxiety or a host of other mental illnesses. But I think it's so important that there are these kind of candid kind of conversations. And it's to say that, to your point, it's when you start seeing something, and I wish somebody had said this to me and there were more conversations about mental health when I was a teenager. It's when you start to see these issues emerging, it's always better to go sooner than later.
Absolutely. It's like learning how to play the piano. If you do it young, it's a lot easier, languages, etc. And so I had, my problem, Scott, was that I had insomnia. Like I was exhausted. The more pressure I got, the less I could sleep. And so I had to learn how to stop my brain working. And so I went, you know, I did many things, but I went to this course, One Thought, and I have learned how to deal with one issue at a time. This multitasking stuff is nuts because it's all absorbing, right? And so I am totally focused on this conversation. I am not going to be, you know, looking at my iPhones or, you know, or thinking about something else. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to this group. And that I learned, and I got to sleep. I learned how to sleep through not controlling, but I guess managing, you know, my mind. And so I did a lot of self-help stuff, a lot, you know, there wasn't much, you know, help back then. God, when I started work, there wasn't an HR department. There was an HR person to go to. If you had a problem with a boss abusing you, the only person you could go to was your boss. And so it's you know, life has really changed. And I think it's really been very, very an exciting change. It really has.
And thanks for sharing that experience. And I agree. I think that the pandemic has I think highlighted the importance of mental health. And I think so much progress I think has been made just in talking about these issues, even in the past few years. But there's still definitely lots of progress that needs to be made. In your book, you write that nothing kills progress like a perfect strategy. Can you elaborate by what you mean in writing this?
So the title of, I think it's chapter 5, Mediocre Strategy, Great Execution. I am a big believer that, you know, I saw, you know, particularly sometimes women waiting to get the perfect plan, right? And I would see my colleagues waiting to get perfection and then starting something. And I saw that, look, if I can get 60% of this idea or plan figured out, and I start to take action, I get to the end faster. I improve the productivity of solving that problem because I fail, I go ahead, you know, I make progress and I start earlier. And so everything I've ever done in my life, Scott, I've said, look, you know, you have to have an outline of where you're going. There's no question. You have to have a business plan. You have to, you know, really predict, you know, whether it's a business or whether it's a project, where it goes. But I'm the one that says, let's go now. Let's go now. Let's start. And if you start, you learn and you get there faster. And so that's always been my motto. And I always push my, I don't, that's not the right word, but I always see opportunity before others see them. I always see the route up the mountain that may be different than what traditional people think. And so I also know that the average person can do 25, 50% more than they think they can. And I've always seen that because I am an average kid coming from a farm in Cape Breton. I've done more than that people ever thought that I could do, right? Even me, in terms of what I think I could ever do. So that to me is something that I've always understood and seen. And if you get a good collaborative environment, you build a great team. You build a team that has a really good, solid focus. You can make things happen much faster than anything else. But you've got to give them the sandboxes to play with. You've got to take the risks with them. You've got to get it. I love holding people back as opposed to pushing people forward. And it's just a much better place to be. So that's why a perfect strategy is a killer.
On the topic of, and something you talked about extensively, which is spotting opportunities. And a lot of young people who want to be entrepreneurs, one of their challenges is trying to figure out where to start. What's the opportunity they want to go after? So what advice do you have for young people on how to spot really compelling opportunities that might be neglected by others?
Look, in chemistry today, I think that there is so much happening in digitization and adjusting to emissions reduction and the application in agriculture, in fintech, in clean tech, these are enormous, right? And so to me, sometimes the easiest things in the world are thought up spontaneous. I'll give you an example this morning. So I did this podcast. I launched this podcast yesterday. It's all about positiveness, all about people from Cape Breton that are affiliated with Cape Breton, that see the opportunity in Cape Breton. So the reaction has been phenomenal, right? And so in the front of the Cape Breton Post, there's a real negative article, and then there's mine. It's like a juxtaposition, right? So someone calls me up and says, Annette, what if we start a company that just talks about good news, right? And do you think that we could get I said, yeah, I do. I think that. So to me, you have to understand your audience. You have to understand your market. You have to understand customers, and find a better way, find an easier way, find a different way. I think, yeah, there are some people that really like negative news all the time, and it's easy to criticize, much easier to criticize than to talk about good things. But I think a lot of people are looking for good things. And so find ways, and it's everywhere. It's how food is delivered and made. It's how, I'm on the board of Zaputo, and we are buying companies that are cheese-based, vegetarian cheese-based products and drinks. And it's really amazing what, steak has been now being made in Petri dishes. And like, it's all happening, right? And so, I think if you're in science, technology, chemistry, physics, those STEM areas are really exciting. In the service sector, in retail, there's all kinds of things that have to be done to improve the productivity in the airline industry, everywhere, right? And so take things that are today and think of how you can make things better. Even sometimes the simplest things are the things that aren't as obvious to people, right? And so, yeah. And so I think, look, and being an entrepreneur is not for the faint of heart. There are lots of them that don't make it. There are lots of them that are really happy just getting to a small, medium-sized company and continuing that way. And, we shouldn't criticize. It's not all about growth. It's not all about crazy growth. Yes, we want to have, unicorns out there, but, like, I'd rather have a lot of people swimming in the pool and creating jobs and creating the economic domestic product and services that we need to get our country, where we need to.
The world is just full. The world is people's oyster. There's so many problems that are just sitting there to be solved, and so many opportunities that are just out there. In your book, you discuss, I think it's presenting to Purdy Crawford when he might have been on the board, or he was on the board of a company affiliated, and how that one presentation kind of changed your life, and how Purdy Crawford, who was also a great Nova Scotian who passed away, I believe, 6 or 7 years ago, originally from Five Island, Nova Scotia, grew up to be one of the most senior and well-respected business leaders in the country. And he was a tremendous mentor and friend to you, as you write about in your book. So can you describe a little bit about how Purdy Crawford supported kind of your career development? And as a sort of corollary, what advice do you have for young people when they're considering working with mentors?
Well, it's such a wonderful story. So I make a presentation to the board of Devco, that coal company. This is in 1984. And Purdy Crawford's on the board. And I talk about the price of coal. I talk about the development of Lingan Phelan, and that was subsequently a coal mine that was built. And I made the presentation, and Purdy Crawford kept asking me questions, right? And I knew the answers. And were they all perfect? No, but I had a perspective, and I think, the CEO at the time and the CFO at the time were, very supportive, but it ended up me answering a lot of questions, right? And so I had great exposure to him. So at the end of that board meeting, he comes up to me and he says, Annette, you live here? And I said, yeah, I live here in Cape Breton, have all my life. And he said, if you ever leave, please call me. And that's the truth. And so my father died in 84. I stayed till 86 with my mom. And I called him in 86. And I didn't take a job with him. He offered me a job at Amasco then. He wasn't CEO yet. I didn't take it. I worked for it. I was so convinced that governments couldn't run companies that I really liked the idea of privatizing companies, right? And I did that for 3 years. And then I joined Amasco as vice president of corporate development, and Crawford was my sponsor during the rest of my life. And even though I didn't stay with Amasco, I was only there for 3 years. It was a little bit awkward me leaving, but I wanted more. I wanted to run something. I knew that if I didn't become an operator, I could never become a CEO or president. And women in those days got stuck into legal or financial, and you couldn't get out. That's changing today, but it was really tough back then. And I knew I needed operational experience. So I made a deal with Crawford at that time, and I said, let me run something. And so I was the director of operations for Den for Men, that little gifts, you wouldn't have remembered, you were just a baby, but that was a little male's gift store chain with the cigar, selling cigars and funny gifts for men. Anyway, it was a friggin' disaster, but I increased the sales. I reduced costs by 25%. I got smitten by the retail industry. And that's when I left, set up a little company called Verschuren Ventures, and convinced Michaels to invest in Canada, and became co-owner of that company. That was really cool. That was a gutsy move. I went to New York, went up to the CEO of Michaels and said, hello, my name's Annette Verschuren. I think there's a big opportunity in the retail sector in crafts in Canada, and I'd like to do a joint venture with you. I can help you get there. Anyway, he thought I was crazy, but he said, let's have lunch. And I knew my numbers. I knew the size of the market. I knew the opportunity, and Bob's your uncle. It happened. And then Home Depot came along and wanted me to join them, and I said no, which is unheard of, but that's because I had an option to stay at Michaels, right? And if I'd left, I would lose all the money. I put 350,000 US into that company. Back then, I mean, it was 89. Like that was almost, that was a ton of money, right? And personal money. And I just couldn't walk away. And so the CEO of Home Depot calls the CEO of Michaels, says, true story, there's a woman in Canada. We've interviewed 6 other people. We like her chutzpah. We like her attitude, and she's working with you guys. And would you consider giving her money back? And they gave me 50,000 stock options, and I didn't have a clue what stock options meant. And I could only relate to salary. And so that's how the deal got done. It was Bernie Marcus talking to Sam Wiley saying, can you give her money back? So, because we think this company is going to become they were talking about $1 billion or $2 billion. Well, I took it up to $6 billion in sales during the tenure I was there, and opened China and ran the Expo Design Center. And so it was a good move on the Home Depot's part, because I think we create a lot of value for the company. But that's how it transpired.
It's a remarkable story, and a testament to I think what you built. And there's very few people who have built 2 of Canada's leading retail companies. You're probably one of the only people in the country that has ever done that. And I'd say another remarkable thing about you, Annette, is I would say you arguably have probably the strongest or the professional network in the country. I think that there's probably very few Canadians that would be hard pressed to have as kind of large of a Rolodex of connections across government, across the nonprofit sector, across corporate Canada,
yes.
Also tons of connections in the United States and around the world. And one of the things I've really admired about you is your ability to maintain relationships with a really large number of people, and not service level, like very genuine, personal kind of relationships, all the while having a huge amount of other responsibilities that you're having to deal with at any point. So can you provide our listeners some tips on how do you build, maintain, foster your professional network?
So one of the chapters in the book of Bet on Me is your network is your net worth. And I have always worked hard in developing those and foster those relationships. And you said 3 very important things. You have to understand how government works. You have to contribute to policy. This is what I did. You have to understand nonprofits. And I've been on boards of nonprofits, and I, for over the years, and, never made any money, but doesn't matter. You're giving back to your community, and you're creating value in terms of, and then the third area is understanding, the corporate, the organizations, right? The players. And, Scott, I could call almost any CEO in Canada today, right? And they would return my calls immediately. And I am, so I've always contributed to stay connected. On those podcasts that just went out, that launch, I sent a note to my list, right? I let people know what I'm up to. And, and people like to be engaged. They like to become knowledgeable of what you're doing. And I don't do it to brag. I do it to stay connected. And so it's really something that, and people just can't get, how do you do all this stuff? How do you do all this stuff? I'm very organized. I've got amazing people surrounding me. But I'll tell you, it's one of the most important things I have. And that relationship, that sponsorship. Yes, he was a mentor, but he was a sponsor. He would get around a board table and amongst all the white guys, and talk about Verschuren, right? And, he would say, look, she really knows what she's doing. She's really capable. And so it's a sponsorship of people, diverse people, that's really important. And so he sponsored me. And so I saw, George Curry from Curry Cooper and Librand was another guy that sponsored me. He was managing director of that coal mine. And he just was so impressed with what I put an organization manual together. That was another thing in the book. He says, and it would have cost 600,000 for us to do that. And you did it. It took me 3 months, but I talked to everybody, every senior executive, put the job descriptions in, put the organization structure, committee structure, got everybody to agree to it and presented it to the CEO. But these are extra jobs that I would do on top of my own job. I've always looked for those projects that could get me recognized, that could allow people to see me, allow people to see my authenticity, to see my brain power, to see my common sense.
Absolutely. And on the topic of sponsorship, we've talked about how Purdy Crawford sponsored you, but you've also sponsored tons of younger people. And I'll speak specifically to Shivani Chotalia, yes, who's a Venture for Canada fellow, who's been a part of your team for we'll be approaching, I think, 7 years, which
7 years. Yes, she's now a director. Yeah, she's amazing.
On the topic of people, one person I would be remiss to also not bring up who's a member of your team is Allison Blunt, who yes, I've gotten to know over the last 7 years. And you talk about in your book, I think you and Allison have worked together for approaching 3 decades.
Yes, 3 decades. Yep.
And she has been, kind of a right-hand woman to you through a lot of these things. So can you describe a little bit your kind of working relationship with Allison and how Allison, how the partnership between you and Allison helps kind of accelerate your impact?
So I met Allison. She was my assistant at Home Depot when I arrived there. Oh my God, it was like chaos. It was like, I couldn't believe I got myself into this. And she was so wise and helped me avoid so many holes and challenges. And so then she went off to HR in Home Depot and worked there. But I've always kept close with her, right? I've always worked with her. She's a woman that really understands me, and we're very complimentary. Sometimes I go too fast. She slows me down and says, Annette, have you considered this, this, and this? So she really is a really important partner in my life, and always has been and still is. And she shouldn't be retired by now, but she's loving it, man. She's like one of the most important people in our organization. She's educating us. She loves to. She's just really enjoying seeing the growth of this organization and the potential of it. But she's such a loyal, smart, impressive lady. Sometimes protects me too much, a little bit, but because I'm a risk taker. There's no question about that. But I adore her, and she's really made a difference in my life. And she spends time with the people that are important to me. And that's why she spends time with you, Scott. And she gets that. She really does.
Yeah, she's a fantastic person. And, I think one of the things that has come up in this interview is just the importance of relationships. And I think it's relationships with your colleagues, the relationships with family, it's relationships with business leaders, but you are very intentional, I think, in fostering. And it's interesting, through BFC, I've met lots of different business leaders. I think a lot of the times there's a lot of turnover in terms of people. It's a real testament to you that you've had this continual working relationship with Allison for 3 decades.
Yeah,
it's quite unique and I think really remarkable. So, and kind of a closing, or you can go.
No, I would say most important talent I have, most important asset I have, is the relationships you build. You're nothing alone. I've learned a long time ago, you do very few things alone, but you can do a lot together. And so to me, that I just nurture that. And I've got an amazing family that I didn't talk about, but I love them. And they are there for me. They love me unconditionally. I am, I'm the one that went away, but the nest is always here for me. And my nieces and nephews, I said yesterday, when I was young, I wanted more, but there wasn't more to get in Cape Breton. And so I want to create, I want things to be created so my nieces and nephews can stay here and live here and contribute in a way. And so that's happening now. So yeah, really, really important part of my life.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I agree. I think Cape Breton is, I mean, you look at things like the Cabot Links and Cabot Cliffs kind of golf course and some of the entrepreneurial endeavors that are being done in Cape Breton. I think that the future of the island is bright after some challenging kind of half century. Annette, we have talked about a really wide range of topics, from your experience growing up in a rural dairy farm in Cape Breton to going through some extremely challenging circumstances and facing death as a teenager. To your experience building two of Canada's largest retailers, your experience in the clean energy space, the importance of personal relationships. We have really talked about a wide amount of things. I really encourage listeners to go check out Annette's podcast and Annette's website, where you can go listen to some of the interviews that she's done with leaders in Cape Breton. And there's so much, I think, for Canadians of all ages and backgrounds to learn about Annette and her leadership and background and experiences. Annette, thank you so much for coming on the podcast this afternoon.
Delighted to be with you, Scott. Thank you for all you're doing.
That's it for this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our social and our email list. Subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss our next episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, tweet us at Venture4Canada. That is Venture, the number 4, Canada, or email us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Stewart, and until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and stay grateful. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is produced by Latifa Farah. Editing and mixing also done by Latifa Farah. Erica Ormanston is our editorial assistant. Mark Wallach and Premium Beat own the copyright and publishing rights related to the song used in this podcast. The comments and opinions, recommendations, or suggestions expressed on the podcast by the guests are not liable to Venture for Canada and belong solely to each individual. Any information provided, stated by our guests and our host, is independent of Venture for Canada. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is a Venture for Canada brand, and all content is owned by Venture for Canada. If you'd like to use our content, please reach out to us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca.